Welcome back to the Building Equity Podcast. I'm James Schlimmer, and again, back to back, I got my buddy John Bowens, Head of Education at Equity Trust here. John, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, James, always happy to be back. Thanks for having me again.
You know, I got to feel like, again, here I am, I come out. I couldn't sleep last night because I was so excited to sit down knowing it's going to be John and James, the band back together, Murtaugh and Riggs, and here you just come out the gate where I feel like you're in a dentist's office.
That's you know me, James, that's my style. I spend most of my time in looking at transactions and answering questions with respect to IRA prohibited transactions and Internal Revenue Code 4975 and Publication 590. And please forgive me if I'm putting any of your viewers to sleep. So back to you, James.
Okay,
Exciting.
Here's the thing. Let me just tell everybody that's witnessing this now. John Bowens is excellent. John Bowens is the nation's premier educational expert when it comes to self-directed IRAs. And what we're here to talk about today is what we believe the 2024 real estate market, I guess, has in store for us. Now, there's a number of geopolitical events that are unfolding as we record this, which is kind of November the 8th of 2023. And what's interesting, John, before we do the disclaimers and all that, one of our first shows we ever did was in February of 2022, which was we were sitting there down here in Naples questioning whether or not Russia was going to invade Ukraine on one of our first shows. So, however, there's a lot to talk about today. I think that the 2024 real estate market is favorable, but probably for all the wrong reasons. Before we get into it, John and I are not giving you any investing advice. We're not giving you any financial advice. We're sitting here giving you information and education. And John, do you have any disclosures you want to give?
No, I think you hit it right, James. Is, we like to provide information and education so folks can make informed decisions. And that's what we're all about here at Equity Trust and Equity Real Estate Investment Services.
So here's the thing, John. On one of the last episodes you and I just recorded, which happened to be 15 minutes ago, we ended the podcast where you kind of went on an impassioned plea to the investors of Equity Trust after you created a YouTube short. You can go see this, folks. This is true. YouTube short with the most views on Equity Trust is how can I pull money from my self-directed IRA early? That's essentially the title. And it just drives you bonkers. And what I kind of said, John, was, man, that was actually a great segue into our 2024 real estate market outlook, because that, to me, coupled with auto loan delinquencies, credit card utilization, we can talk about our government debt in just a little bit. We are a nation on tilt, and you've got the proof with over 2,200 views of self-directed IRA investors that are trying to dip into those funds early. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it was a bit disappointing, James, quite frankly. Although I appreciate folks absorbing the content and the material, and the material and content we feel strongly is very educational, informative. We don't have a lot of hype, as you could tell from my introduction there. If that's what you're looking for, you're not necessarily going to get that with me. I think very logical as an investor myself. I try to walk down the rational and logical path. I think that I see far too often people making emotional decisions around investing instead of logical decisions around investing. And I think it's really, really important to think about that. Is this logical? Will this make sense for me long term? All too often do I see folks that they want to take money out of their IRA, maybe their Roth IRA. The Roth IRA is an incredibly cherished retirement account. The money goes in after tax. It grows tax-free as long as you follow all the rules and guidelines. Your profits are tax-free. When you take money out after 59.5, you pay 0% tax. You can leave it to your children or grandchildren. They don't pay tax. I mean, these are incredibly powerful tax savings vehicles. And unfortunately, I find all too often, I get calls every day from people. How can I take money out of my retirement account to buy a house for my son or daughter? Maybe that's what you need to do. I'm not going to stop someone. I'm not going to advise them whether they shouldn't. But what I encourage people to do is look at it through the logical lens of, is this financially sound? Are there other ways that I could buy a property for my son or daughter if that's what I need to do, or an in-law, or even myself personally? The IRA is highly tax privileged, so I can't encourage folks enough to understand that. And when looking at investing, particularly around investing with retirement accounts, making sure that they look through the lens of logic and ration and not through emotion.
I mean, it makes perfect sense, John. However, the economy is not rational. It's not logical. However, everything goes in cycles. And it's that theory in real estate that I look at, and I can hear my dad in 2005 telling me, when I bought a house at the peak of the market, my dad told me, don't buy the house, John. Papa Schlimmer, he says, don't do it, son. And I said, Dad, it's real estate. It'll never go down. And he goes, Jamesy, I have seen this happen time and time again. It goes up and it goes down. And here I am, 22 years old, thinking I know more than the wisdom tree of my old man, Papa Schlim. And I was completely wrong, by the way. However, I took that as a learning experience. And you see that these cycles repeat themselves. And the humans who are in leadership are humans, John. And they follow the same predictable pattern over, and over. So if we were to talk about the real estate market, there's something that I find interesting right now today. And there's an emerging trend on social media that's starting to bubble. And it is, I'm saying the Gen Zers, I think it's Gen Zers, who are just hitting the workforce, could be some of the younger millennials as well, are complaining about rent and the rent increases. There's a narrative today, in November the 8th, in the media, rents are through the roof and folks can't afford rent. And I'll give you an example here. This is as of, I'm gonna bring up my data right here. As of October's information, this is according to Zumper. Zumper has a great national rental report. The median two-bedroom home last month is renting for $1,862. One bedroom for $1,505. That is expensive. That seems up there, right? However, we're not taking advantage of folks, but this is a show for real estate investors that are buying property with their self-directed IRA, and for the most part, they're putting long-term tenants in there. I gotta believe the current situations with where rent is, investors are happy. What do you think, John?
When I think about this, I look at it through the lens of a real estate investor, and it's all driven by interest rates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, it's all driven by interest rates. As an investor, a year and a half to 2 years ago, I could buy a rental property, and right, I could be at 3 3/4, 4%, 4.25% interest rate on that loan. And so that makes a material difference in my cash flow compared to now, where I'm at over 9%.
Sure.
So naturally, as a real estate investor owning rental properties, you have to take into account
The cost of the money, yeah.
Right? Your taxes, your insurance, your repairs, right? Especially when you own houses that are older, right? You're not repair free. Things happen, right? Electrical issues, plumbing issues, siding's falling off the side of the house, right? You got to send somebody out there to repair it. And so you have to factor all of these things in, and that that's where I see the issue. At looking through the lens as an investor, it's all driven by interest rates. And I understand that, home affordability index and the challenges that the everyday consumer has. I get that, the nation, the consumer debt crisis that is upon us. More consumer debt than ever. People have to start paying their college debt back. And so I totally respect what you're saying there, James, about, Generation Z, and they're entering the workforce. They might not be getting paid what they expected they were going to get paid right out of college. And, now they got to pay $1,400 for rent. And that's a serious issue and serious challenge. Unfortunately, I don't have the solution for that issue.
Well, I think from a rental standpoint, you're spot on, right? If there's loans, now I would make an argument that says majority of Equity Trust Self-Directed IRA investors purchase these properties free and clear. I know majority aren't using non-recourse loans, so let's say they do have these properties free and clear. The market, the supply and demand of rentals has been favorable over the last couple years, right, where they could charge more. They could make more ROI on these properties based on rental increases. The narrative, I would say, today on social media is rent is through the roof. However, the data is starting to show in real time, and it's something that should be monitored, which is kind of my first little bullet point, more rental properties are being built, right? It's actually rents are starting to cool down. That would sound crazy if you were talking to tenants and this was open to the general public. But you can look at this, look at the article on Zumper. They look at each region throughout the United States, other than New York City. Rents are actually starting to tick down, and they're expecting it to tick down slightly based on the influx of supply. Find it to be fascinating and interesting. However, a one bedroom for $1,500, that stings. And your point, when you talk about the younger generation that's just entered the workforce, yeah, their income has not risen at the same pace as the consumer price index, consumer goods, rent, cost of food, eggs, cars. All of that stuff has just blown through the roof, and clearly the inflation numbers don't adequately show it. But however, that's kind of manipulated as well, which is really part of my whole theory on the real estate market next year. But I wanted to hit with the rents because I know that our investors are talking about that. But you need to monitor the supply and demand. I'm in Naples, Florida, John, as you know. They are building multifamily units like crazy down here, like crazy. I would imagine in the Sunbelt states, that is the case, which is why when you look at these articles, they're saying the Sunbelt states specifically, Phoenix right now is getting hit like crazy where rents are cooling off because of this surge of rental properties that were built that are hitting. The supply is going up, supply and demand. Now, when it comes to interest rates, this kind of goes into my bigger narrative. I see interest rates coming down next year. Now, I think it's important to note here too, John, right? You and I are just two regular guys. Could be wrong. We're not economists. However, we do follow this closely. I follow real estate very, very, very closely, as you know, right? So I could 100% be wrong, but I am going to put my name next to it that I see the Fed pivoting next year. And when I say pivoting, they've been battling inflation this whole time, which is why interest rates are where they at. In this moment, 30-year, 7.76% is where it's at, right, as we record this. I see the Fed pivoting. And then the question would be, well, why do you see that, James? I don't see it as a good thing that they're doing it. I see it because they have essentially no other choice. The debt, John Bowens, that we have, take a look at this right here.
It's over 33 trillion.
It's unbelievable. We did $600 billion in a month. We increased our federal debt. 600 billion. We did 58 billion in a day. This was last month, right? The sheer debt that we have and the interest on that debt, which is directly related to the Fed's fight on inflation, it's unsustainable at the current way we're doing it. Now, according to Ray Dalio, Principles of a New World Order, which is a fantastic book, by the way, highly recommend it. But what he does a wonderful job is essentially looking back in history and say, what have our leaders done? These global empires, what have they done to fight debt, right? And do they do what's hard or do they do what's easy? And the simplest thing for them to do is print money, right? And when they print money, you can call that quantitative easing. Right now, we're fighting inflation. We're in a QT or quantitative tightening phase where we're trying to fix everything in a way, right? You can argue, are we really fixing it? I would say we're not, but that's kind of where we're at. Investors are looking to say, when is the Fed going to stop this fight on inflation because they've broken stuff long enough? I am taking the position to say, they're going to change that spring of next year. And why do I think that? Why? Because then we're in the heat of this presidential election. And I would say the current administration would want things to look favorable, or at least a narrative that looks favorable. And they're going to have Jay Powell pull back on the rates. And then we start to see that pressure come down. As interest rates come down, loan originations start, and away we go. When we are in a period of quantitative easing, stock market goes up, we're printing money, and it's not a good thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing, big picture, but it's just the way it is. The other alternative for our leaders is to let the Jenga board of our US economy fall, right? Let it fall, let it purge itself of its sickness, and let it rebuild the correct way. And you're kind of like washing away all the bad mistakes. They've never, ever shown they're willing to do that. So the other alternative that they could do to keep this massive bubble going is print money. They have to stop the quantitative tightening. They start quantitative easing. They start printing money to keep this bubble going. So I fully see that. And when that happens, what are the consequences of that? And it actually, the stock market goes up. What does it look? Interest rates come down. So what does that mean for the real estate industry? I think it looks very, very good. I don't like why they're going to do it, but it's just history shows it's what they're going to do. I'll stop there and just see if you want to chime in, John.
I would just say, James, whether interest rates stay the same, if it's just a pause through 2024, or they go down, that there's still opportunities for real estate investors, opportunities to buy rent properties. I've heard of some folks say, well, I'm not in the market to buy any more rent properties because interest rates are so high. And in some respects and in some areas, they may not be able to get financing. And so that may be the limitation for them. But in other areas, they may be able to. And so waiting for interest rates to drop, there could be opportunities, right, that you miss out on. So again, I go back to I struggle with making the emotional decisions based on, all the macro data that is, sort of thrown at us on a daily basis through many different media sources. And instead, just looking at the deal, looking at the opportunity, running the cash flow analysis and saying, yes, this is a good deal and I should move forward, or no, I shouldn't. And assuming interest rates go down, there's a lot of mortgage lenders out there that are offering, and I just read another article about this and I experienced it recently. A lot of mortgage lenders are offering, essentially when mortgage rates do go down, the fees are going to be lower to refi. And so it'll make a lot more sense for someone to refi, maybe even a year after they buy a house with, let's say a 30-year fixed mortgage for an investment property. And so that's something I think that folks should think about is, look at it through, again, I keep I keep pressing on this, looking at it through the logical, rational lens and not the emotional decision, making sure the numbers make sense and pulling the trigger based on that and not kind of what's going on out in the macro world. Obviously, there's a supply issue. That will be interesting when we start to see all of these buy for rent or build for rent properties coming on the market. I understand that there's contracts out there that may not even actually be contracts that someone's going to close on. So I think it'll be interesting in 2024 to see what happens with supply, what happens with overall asset prices. Interest rates will do what they do, and I think one way or another, investors will continue to buy and sell even through challenging markets.
So if your point, I'll always say this too, there's always a deal out there. There's always, a property that just went to probate, or somebody needs to do a deed in lieu or whatever. Those are always there. I 100% agree with you. However, and I'm going to say, if I look at home prices, right, just in general, home values next year, I don't see home values coming down. If anything, I see them appreciating as they normally have. One, because of the supply and demand, just as simple as that. Now, you could say if interest rates stay high, maybe sellers have to tick down the value of their home because buyers can't afford it. Very logical. However, I don't see interest rates staying high. I kind of touched on that. The other thing is when you start talking about listings, or really, before we talk about listings, let's talk about where we are currently in the real estate market. And kind of the benchmark that I like to look at is just existing home sales. We're sub 4 million, John. We're at 3.9, and the numbers for October will come out probably in a couple days, and fully expect it to tick lower there. But we're sub 4 million, so about 3.9 million homes year over year they're expecting to sell, right? Now, what's normal? Normal, 5 million, 5.1 million. What did we see during the peak of the COVID craze? 6.1, right? I am making another statement and saying we are at the bottom of the real estate market right now in fourth quarter 23, which means I believe that a rising tide, everything kind of gets back up to normal. So if you think about the narrative, if it went back to 5 million, let's just say by the end of next year, everybody would say the real estate market's on fire, right? But it's really just recalibrating back to normal. Now, here's what I always like to do, John. I like to say, I'm just a regular guy. Maybe I'm wrong. I have a feeling. I can look at history. I can see this is what our leaders have done before. But I like to find other people who are way smarter than me to help either support or kind of disprove where my theory is. And one of the things that I follow, I found this white paper. You and I may have spoke about it, but if we did not, I'm going to bring it up on the screen. You can find it. This UCLA economics professor, his name is Ed Leamer. He created a white paper. It's 74 pages. It's called Housing is the Business Cycle, right? It's an excellent white paper. It's dry. He's actually very entertaining in the way that he writes, but regardless, the theory or his hypothesis is that if you look at the GDP numbers, and I'm going to show you the GDP numbers here because it supports what I'm saying. But if you look at the GDP numbers and the residential contribution to the GDP numbers, it is a sign of either the country as a whole heading into recession or recovering from that recession. Does that make sense? All right, so take a look here. If I share my screen, I don't know how we'll end up showing this, but it's important that you see this, Mr. John Bowens, because you're the guy. So you see what's on the screen here? These are the GDP numbers that were just released for third quarter, October 26th of 2023. You can see it, right?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. So I am going to scroll down here once I can get to related materials, full release and tables. You got to get into the nitty gritty, John. You got to roll up the sleeves and you got to scroll into the actual data, buddy. And look here as we get to bingo. what you're seeing on the screen here, and I want to zoom in. You see line 13, residential? This is the residential contribution to our GDP numbers. And people could say, well, what does that mean? It could be rents, it could be existing home sales, it could be Home Depot, rehab, and materials that go into residential homes, right? But I want you to see, as I highlight over here in 2021, you could see it switches negative. So Q1 21, there was 9.8, and then it switched negative to 4.4. Following me so far?
Yep.
All right. I was able to track when it first started going negative, when did existing home sales, according to the National Association of Realtors, start to dip? And it was an 8-month lag, just for the record. So 8-month lag. But you can see here, if I stop my share real quick, so I can see you. Unanimously, we could say the real estate market as a whole has been in a lull, right? It's low. It's bad. People would say it's not good right now, right? Would you say that? Would you say that, hey, over the last year or so, the real estate market has not been, it's not good? That's kind of the narrative, is my question for you, right?
My reaction is always, I've never subscribed to any of the macro news. As a mom and pop investor, there's, you know my narrative, James. There's always deals out there. Sometimes they're harder to find than other times, but that's why there are investors that prevail and some that just sit on the sidelines.
Well, I like that you're not giving me an inch. However, if you were to look at existing home sales, 6.1 down to 3.9, people will say the real estate market is tanked. Okay, great. I'm going back in here. Hang on. You can see for 9 quarters, the residential contribution to our GDP was negative, 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 negative. And if you look at the Q3 numbers, it just flipped positive. Now, according to Ed Lemer's paper, this would be a sign of recovery. I'm looking at this saying, oh wow, that's really compelling. I had this feeling about what I think the government's going to do regarding the debt, flip on quantitative easing, which is going to print money, which now we're going to lower rates come spring. According to this, if there's an 8-month lag, that gets us to June of next year, where do we start to see a change? Now again, this is 1 quarter. Does the 4th quarter go back to negative? I don't know. However, if I had to put my poker chips, I'm looking at a much smarter person than me, their theory, supported here by the numbers that just came out in Q3. So I say, okay, that's kind of interesting. Well, what else is there? Well, you start looking at listings, right? And if I was to show you on my screen, I'll go to the IRA Title Pro Data Center. You can see listings is still about 737,000 for October, right? And that's kind of the thing, it's supply and demand. There's not enough listings. Why would sellers want to put their home on the market if they're sitting on a 3% interest rate and have to get something now at 7%, right? There's not enough listings. Well, if the listings increased, and you talked about some of the build for rent, could that affect home prices just based on supply and demand? Potentially. However, I'm watching closely the information that AirDNA put out, I'll stop my share, on the number of short-term rentals. Now, folks are still making a killing on the short-term rental market, Airbnb, VRBO, and so forth. But there's about 1.2 million short-term rentals in the country, okay? And now when you tell me, John Bowens, the #1 video is how can I dip into my self-directed IRA and pull out that money early. And when I see that auto delinquencies are at a high, and when I see that credit card utilization is, I think it's $1 trillion in debt, it's the highest it's ever been. Could investors, to get capital for whatever it is that they need, say, you know what? I want to sell that short-term rental. Could this other growing trend, landlords becoming overly frustrated with the tenants on their Airbnb who are treating their homes poorly, right? The other thing to look at too is the hotel vacancies. Hotels are becoming, it's rising, meaning the vacancy rates are going down in the hotel market, which is interesting because people want to have the services at the hotel that they don't get in the Airbnb, but the cost is the same, right? So it's whether or not I look at and say, if 20% of the 1.2 million short-term rentals went and they said, you know what, I'm going to sell that property because I need that money for something, or I don't want to dip into my IRA to be able to pull out funds, let's just unload that property. We're back at just over 1 million listings. And what does that do to home prices? What does that do to property sales? What does that do to the overall kind of market? And it's not that I see it happening, but it'd be tough for me not to say I'm in on that. And then you tie in the Wall Street homes, which is the build for rent properties, and you've got an opportunity. When does a Tricon Residential or American Homes for Rent, when do they make the decision to say, you know what, we just want to unload 5% of our stuff because we need capital to be able to buy again, or we need to be, we're expecting a buy season coming up, we need to be able to purchase a lot more homes. How does that happen, and how does that affect the rental market? How does that affect home sales? All of this stuff is intertwined, which I find to be really, really interesting. I'll shut up for a second and see if you want to jump in.
You know, what I'll add, James, is, you know, going back to interest rates and thinking about all of this through the lens of an investor. There's different ways to participate in real estate investing. You can be a landlord. You can buy rental property and rent them out long term, right? You had mentioned Airbnb, short-term rental. That's a strategy. What about house flipping? Okay, that's a strategy. And regardless of what your strategy is, the opportunity and the success factor is very much reliant on what's happening in the overall economy and with interest rates. What about the lending side of the equation? So as an investor, we've talked routinely on these shows about private money lending money secured by real estate. And so there's an opportunity there as an investor to be a private money lender. And you can imagine that, you know, with credit being tighter, that some of the hard money lending financing options out there for real estate investors aren't always there, or at such high interest rates and points and fees that it's really challenging for a house flipper to be able to put food on the table with that cost of capital. And that's where I see the opportunity for real estate investors to, in a mom and pop fashion, at a grassroots level, be able to build communities and put people in homes, in affordable homes, and offer financing for local investors. And so that's what I think about a lot. You know, yeah, I think it's interesting, and it's good to look at, you know, what's the American Homes for Rent and you know, Blackstone, what are they doing, and are they buying more? Are they building more? We have to understand that these are also entities that their cost of capital is much different than our cost of capital as mom and pop investors. And so regardless of the strategy that you're looking to utilize, I think it's important to factor in all of these issues that we're talking about. I always go back to, you know, looking at every individual opportunity as an individual asset. No different than if I was going to buy a stock or a mutual fund, right? I'm going to look at that individual security for what it is, the cash flow potential, what is my cost of capital, what's my potential exit strategy in the transaction. And lastly, I'll mention, James, it's been interesting working in the sort of local real estate investor marketplace, talking to real estate investors day in and day out. Back in 2008 and 2009, when I got started, there were a lot of folks doing subject to deals. For those of you that aren't familiar, subject to is buying a house subject to the existing mortgage, basically taking over the mortgage payments.
Sure.
And seller financing, lease options, land contracts, call it everything that sort of falls under that umbrella of creative real estate financing. That is now starting to reemerge. And while interest rates were very low, it didn't really matter, right? Because somebody that was sitting on a house at a very low interest rate, and they could buy another house at the same interest rate, it didn't really matter, right? But now, what are people doing, right? They're at a 3 3/4 or a 4% interest rate, and if they sell their house, and when I say sell their house, it may not be their primary residence. I'm talking about maybe it's an investment property, right?
Yep.
So if they sell that investment property, and maybe they're going to do a 1031 exchange, for example. So as you know, James, Equity Trust, we have a 1031 exchange business line that we service, and we handle people that want to do 1031 exchanges, not always in their IRA, but outside of their IRA. And so, unless through even through a 1031 exchange type tax deferral mechanism, you're going to be buying equal or greater value property or properties at a double or triple the interest rate that you had on that single family. So you can imagine, all these landlords that have acquired all these properties over the year, what are they doing right now? Are they selling their houses? I don't think they are, to be honest with you. I don't have any data, to be honest with you, James. You would probably be better at finding that than I would. But I know I just talk to investors all day, every day at conferences and seminars. And I don't know a lot of landlords that are starting to age out that are selling their houses. But I can tell you they're going to have to do something, especially if their children or grandchildren don't want to be in the real estate business. What are they going to do with all that property? Are they going to leave it to them? Well, they can, but they're going to leave them a big headache. What are they going to do? Well, they're probably going to end up selling, and possibly selling on land contract for deed, seller financing to younger real estate investors. I just closed on a real estate deal not too long ago, James, and I was talking with a guy at the title company, and he told me that he has an investor that sold 30 houses to it was a package deal, sold 30 houses to an out-of-state investor. This is in Cleveland, Ohio. Sold 30 properties to an out-of-state investor. A younger investor, had capital to bring to the table. And, I'm starting to see where people are thinking about that, offloading their properties to investors that are maybe up and coming on a land contract or seller financing at a lower interest rate than what we see today.
Well, when you say, hey, where's the data? These folks aren't selling. That's true in this moment. However, I'm making the pitch or the narrative to say that this is the bottom where we're at today. And however it goes, the number of transactions will increase next year. And why do I think it's going to increase? I think rates are going to come down, which is going to be a proponent of that. I think that what we've got with the Ukraine war and what's going on in the Middle East, which I wish would stop, however, they're there. I think that those two geopolitical events gives the U.S. the ability to turn on the printing press of money, and everybody would understand it and not ask questions. So that gives the ability for the Fed to start printing money, pivoting on the interest rates, all of which affects what we do in real estate. And I think we're at the bottom, long story short. So if we were to talk about the sheer volume of transactions, I think folks are going to start selling and listing as we come to next year. I think the GDP numbers kind of show it. I think I'm going to show you the last little piece here because, again, I'm always trying to disprove my theory. It's the last little piece, and this is fun. This is good for our listeners because they're seeing how much of a nerd I am. Everybody knows, John Bones, that you are a self-directed IRA nerd. We get that. But if there's data to support one's theory, it's kind of interesting. So I'm going to show you here on the screen very quick. Now, John Bones, what you're looking at here in this Excel document, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
I can see it.
So I live in Collier County, Florida, right? I track every single deed that's recorded in public records in Collier County. And I've been doing this since 1982. Now again, we went back and backtracked the data. I didn't do it when I was 1982 because I was just born. But regardless, I have every pivotal moment in history, like for instance, the first Iraq War, the September 11th, the dot-com bust. We've got the Great Recession highlighted in red. You've got COVID in blue. If we come over here to 2023, and if you can see, I'm going to try to highlight these in a way, even though it shades it. January was down 31%. February, negative 15%, negative 10%, 16%, 15%. June, negative 21%. 14% in July. Houston, we flipped positive in August. We flipped positive in September. And we flipped positive in October. Now, that is a hyper-focused local market view, which would be micro-level econ, by the way, to support my macro-level thesis of what's yet to come. I will tell you why I believe this, because the real estate market, at least what I could show in that data, is, I'll stop my share here, John Bowen, so I can see you. In October of 2008, when the media hit about Bear Stearns and the collapse, and we were officially in recession and we're in dire straits, we would have seen that in the real estate market, according to my data in Collier County deeds recorded, in 06. 06 overall was a 30% drop. And then there was a 20+% drop in 07. In October of 08, deeds recorded actually started increasing in Collier County, Florida, which is kind of that old adage that, hey, when it hits the Wall Street Journal, you know, typically really savvy investors are doing the opposite of what the media says, right? It's, hey, everybody's screaming the sky is falling, but that's really where the opportunity comes in. The investors come in. What I'm seeing here, August of this year, shows that we kind of hit the bottom of the real estate market in Collier County, Florida, which is this hyper-focused market. I get it. However, I'm looking at that. I'm looking at history shows what our leaders will do. When it comes hard, are they going to let the economy tumble, or are they going to turn on the printing press for money? We're going to turn on the printing press of money. When we do that, rates will come down, home sales will come up next year. Home sales come up, that means there will be added inventory. Added inventory may bring prices down. I don't see that necessarily happening, but it could. And rents are going to stay essentially the same for that matter. So that's kind of what I see with the real estate market. I'll give you the last word, John Bowens.
I think we could pretty much end on that, James. I don't believe I have anything else to add. I think that was a good overview of, you know, what's happening from a macro perspective. And, you know, as I've stressed throughout the entire call, I just encourage investors to think rationally and logically through making decisions on where they're allocating their capital. That's the way I look at it. There's a number of different ways you can allocate your capital. You could allocate your capital into the public markets. You could allocate your capital into real estate, into individual rent homes. You could invest in a real estate fund or a real estate syndication. You could put your money in cryptocurrency or gold and silver, or you could just leave it in cash, right?
Yep.
And there are, you know, a number of variables that you need to consider across all of those different asset classes. And based on what's happening in the economy and what's happening, you know, in the United States and globally, impacts the performance of those various asset classes. So I just encourage folks to, think logically through that. And as you allocate your capital, make sure you understand the liquidity of the investments that you're investing in. Have an exit strategy. If you're buying rental properties, for example, what does that exit strategy look like? What happens if you need to sell those properties quickly and free up some cash? What's the opportunity to refinance in the future if you're getting mortgages now to buy properties? What about cash buyer purchases? That's been interesting, James, because you are correct. A lot of folks are using IRAs as a cash buyer.
Yep.
And back when interest rates were very low, a lot of people were looking at transactions and saying, well, no, I'm going to fund this with a 30-year fixed mortgage on an investment property because interest rates are so low, instead of using the IRA. And now it's sort of the opposite. People are looking at those transactions and saying, hey, it actually makes a lot of sense for me to use my IRA and acquire a property as a cash buyer, and maybe look at a refinance down the road via non-recourse loan when interest rates start to decrease. So that's all I got, James. I appreciate you having me join these calls as always. I think that was a good overview of what's happening and potentially what's to come.
Excellent, John Bowens. Everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Building Equity Podcast. I'm James Schlimmer with John Bowens. If you are buying, selling, or lending using your self-directed IRA, make sure you head over to IRAtitlepro.com. Full suite of resources for you to use, whether you're buying, selling, or lending. Closing company, experienced team, happy to help you. Look forward to speaking with you soon. John Bowens, as always, happy holidays. Looking forward to the next time I get you on the show, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.